Good morning all and welcome to our next webinar regarding IAS 24 today. Today, Anuka and myself will be talking about related party transactions and how to disclose them in your IFRS financial statements. So practical logistics, similar as in previous webinars, everybody's muted. The maximum will be 1 hour and a half. If you would have any questions, please go to the webinar app and address them through questions or if more extensive through the chat. Afterwards, we'll try to put in a short poll to evaluate, and afterwards the recording will be available on our website as well. In the downloads app, you can already find the PDF version of our slide deck, as well as an additional document which can be useful during the webinar, but we'll explain more in detail later on. So we have had a number of webinars already in the course of 2022 regarding consolidation joint arrangements, operating segments, share-based payments, and today we'll be talking about IAS 24 related party transactions. Later on, in early December, on the 1st of December, we'll be talking about the IFRS updates and the recently launched ESMA priorities for 2022. And then closing off, there will be a webinar regarding IAS 33 on earnings per share. Next to that, we're also announcing 2 additional webinars. They will be focusing on ASEF tax block tagging, which is a new requirements, increasing the XBRL tagging requirements, which were launched already last year, and will be extending to more the notes and the tax blocks. During those webinars, and those requirements are applicable for financial statements as of January 1st, 2022. So starting as from January 1st, 2022. So in principle, most financial statements closing 31st of December will be confronted with those new tagging requirements. So we'll be giving some more explanations as well as practical examples on how you can cover and make sure you're compliant with those new tagging requirements. Both sessions will take place next week, the week of November 22 and November 24. If you would be interested, don't hesitate to go to our website and subscribe for those additional webinars as well. Moving back to IAS 24, 5 topics in 5 broad chapters will discuss IAS 24. First, in introductions, then we'll move forward to the scope and the definitions that exist within the standard, and also how to identify related parties. Next on, we'll give the requirements regarding disclosure, as well as some examples on how you can do that, and to close off a conclusion regarding IAS 24. First of all, as introduction, the hypothetical family NV group, which we'll be serving during our webinar as an example. You can find that overview in the handouts, so you can talk through. So the whole family NV group, where family NV is in the middle here, is basically having a daughter called Mother Search, and Mother Search NV is the reporting entity. So all questions will start from Mother Search NV, and what are the related parties from Mother Search NV. Adding to that, so family NV is the head of the group, which has 2 key management personnel, Albert Tillens and Mrs. Anna Dirks, and then Mr. Koen is key management of Mother Search NV. Mrs. Anna Dirks also has a number of investments in other entities, being fully owned joint ventures or associates. Family NV has then majority participation in Mother Search NV, as well as other investments through Sigma BV, which has itself 2 subsidiaries at 100% and 90%, and a joint venture at 40%. Mother Search NV has also some investments and also relationship with the banks and so forth. But we'll go deeper in that in each of detailed questions as well. So what is now the purpose of IAS 24 related parties standard? Well, the goal is to have appropriate related party disclosures in your financial statements as foreseen by IAS and IFRS. Why is that important? Because the nature and the impact of those related party transactions can have an impact on the financial position and the financial performance of an entity. So it's considered important for the readers of those financial statements to have an insight in what are now the related party transactions. Also, through this webinar, we will be focusing on the terms and the scope, how to identify who is all considered as a related party under the definitions of IAS 24, what are the minimal related party disclosures, and if applicable, there is some partial disclosure exemption for government-related entities. Also note that the scope of this webinar is IAS 24, whereas in practice, most entities will be confronted with additional disclosure requirements for also related parties, which is requirements by regulators, being in Belgium the FSMA, or at a higher level ESMA, or in the SEC, and also local legislation. A practical example which all quoted companies will have are remuneration reports, which are included in the annual report, and technically from an IFRS point of view, these are not part of the financial statements. So there is a kind of overlap. We'll go deeper on that, what are more extended requirements by those legislations, but this webinar focuses what is the minimum required by IAS 24, and in principle for non-quoted companies, those will be the minimum related party disclosures that are needed. So looking at scopes and definitions.
Thank you, Hans. IAS 24, when shall it be applied? It shall be applied in identification of the related parties, related party relationships, but also the transactions. And it shall be applied in identifying what the outstanding balances are with your related parties, including also commitments between an entity and its related parties. The standard requires disclosure of the relationships you have with your related parties, but also the transactions. It requires disclosure of outstanding balances and commitments to the related parties. Before we make it practical and go to some examples based on the family NV, it's important that we know some of the definitions, some of the terms that are used in the standard. These are terms like key management personnel, related party, government-related entities, close family members, and reporting entity. So first, we have a look at some of the definitions here. What is the reporting entity at first instance? Well, in fact, that is the entity that is preparing its financial statements. So the entity that it's all about. What is a related party? Well, there the definition is split into two parts. We have the part A, which is on this slide, and part B is on the next slide. In part A, we talk about persons. So a person, a natural person, or what we call a close family member. We will see later on what the definition is of a close family member. But if or when can a person be a related party? That is, if any of the following three conditions is fulfilled. Either that person has control or joint control over the reporting entity, or it has significant influence over the reporting entity, or if that person is a member of key management personnel, either of the reporting entity, but it's also possible that it's of the parent of the reporting entity. So this is a related party with respect to a person, a natural person. When we then move on to part B of the definition of related parties, it's about entities. So here they speak about when is an entity related to the reporting entity. Well, that's the case if any of the following conditions apply. Either the entity and the reporting entity are members of the same group, or one entity is an associate or a joint venture of the other entity, or both entities or joint ventures of the same third party. And it can also be that one entity is a GV, a joint venture of the third entity, and the other one is an associate. We will see it more practical with examples later on, and we refer back to these definitions then at that time. So in the following slides, we will create the opportunity to also answer some polls to see what knowledge you already have on related parties. and the application, in fact, of the definitions to some practical examples. You have, like Hans said, in the handouts, a separate group chart of family NV. It can be useful to put that aside from the webinar to have a look at it during the examples. So this is the group chart of family NV, which you can also open separately from the PDF handout. We will then go to a first poll, but I let you read and we go through it, the questions on the slide. The question in the poll will be, which of the following statements are true related to the reporting entity, which is the mother search NV? And there are 5 statements. First statement is delta BV is not a related party because there is no control over mother search NV. The second statement is sigma BV is not a related party. PBV is a related party because it is controlled by a party who is key management personnel of the parents, being family NV. Epsilon BV is related party because mother search is an associate of Delta. And Mu BV is not a related party because it's a joint venture of Delta and mother search is an associate. So we will launch the poll and leave some time because it's, in fact, these are 5 questions. And then you have the time to answer if you have your handout of the family NV group structure besides. We will now start the poll and come back afterwards to answer together. We will go through the answers together. I see that most people have voted and that the answers that got the most true statements are the PBV and Epsilon BV. But we will go through the answers one by one. The first one, delta BV, the statement is delta BV is not related party because there's no control over mother search and V. Well, that's false. It is a related party because delta BV, if you look at the chart, delta BV has significant influence over mother search. And according to the definition B2, they say if the entity has significant influence over the reporting entity, then it is considered a related party. So delta BV is a related party, and therefore this statement was false. The second statement, Sigma BV is not a related party. That is the statement. The answer is false. Sigma BV is a related party, and that is because they are members of the same group. And that refers back to the definition B1 that we saw earlier on the slides. So if they are members of the same group, then they are related parties. Yeah. So this is a false statement. The third statement, PBV is related party because it's controlled by a party with key management personnel of the parent being family NV. That statement is true. Key management personnel of the parent in this case is Anna Dirks, and Anna Dirks controls PBV. There's 100% relationship between Anna Dirks and PBV. And as Anna Dirks is also key management personnel of Family NV, which is the parent of Mother Search, these parties are related to each other. There's a control relationship and a key management personnel relationship that binds both parties to each other, or the party PBV with Mother Search NV. Like I said, key management personnel can be either of the reporting entity or of the parent. And in that case, you have related party. Epsilon BV is related to Mother Search because it's an associate of Delta BV. Yes, that's true. So Epsilon is indeed a related party. As Epsilon BV is in the group structure, one of the 100% subsidiaries of Delta, and Delta has a significant influence over Mother Search. And then we have MuBV. MuBV, that was a joint venture under Delta BV. And here we say the statement is it's not a related party, but that statement is false because MuBV is also a related party. If one entity is a joint venture of a third entity, in this case Delta, then Mother Search, who is an associate of that same entity, is related to MuBV. So it's an associate and joint venture relationship here, which combines both. Some other of the definitions then. Close family member. What is a close family member? Well, they say in the standard it includes, but it's not limited to, children and dependents. And there it's very important that we look at the dependencies. If you, as a person, has influence over some other persons in your family, then that is in fact called a close family member. Or if there's a person from who you are dependent from, then the relationship between that person and the entity that you are working for or that you have a relationship with is considered close family member and can thus be a related party of the entity. Key management personnel, that are the persons that have authority and responsibility for the planning and controlling of the activities of the entity, either directly or indirectly. We will see later on also some examples. And then we have government-related entities, and that one is important because for the disclosure requirements, and we'll see that at the end of this session, there are some exemptions with respect to government-related entities. An entity that is controlled or jointly controlled or significantly influenced by a government is called a government-related entity. We will see some examples. The question is, are the following entities related parties of Mother Search, in this case, still the reporting entity? The first one, Family NV, well, I think that's an obvious one. The answer is yes. It's a related party because Family NV, in this case, controls Mother Search. And we make the reference to the definition again, A1. Delta BV, yes, that's of course a related party. It has significant influence over Mother Search. Reference to the definition A2. In the case of PBV, and that was also included in the poll, so we answered that already. Yes, it's a related party to Mother Search NV because it's controlled by Anna Dirks, and you see it here now also visual on part of the group structure. It is controlled by Anna Dirks, who is a key management personnel of the mother of, or of the parent of Mother Search NV. And Anna Dirks thus is as well a related party because she is a key management personnel herself of family NV. Epsilon also was included, but again, here we have it visual again, is related because it links a subsidiary of Delta with the associates of Delta being Mother Search. Again, the reference to the definition here is B2. And then we have Mu and Tau. And for Tau, I think Mu, we also discussed it during the answers in the poll. But for Tau, that is not a related party because there's no control nor joint control relationship that is connecting the parties. Tau BV is an associate of Delta. So there's no control nor joint control of Delta over Tau. And therefore, it is not linked to Mother Search that is also an associate. So here we have 2 times significant influence. In that case, we do not have a related party relationship. There should be at least one control or joint control link. What is not in scope of IAS 24? Well, in fact, IAS 24 does not deal with the recognition or the measurement of the related party transactions. So in the assessment, if transactions are, for instance, at arm's length or not, yeah, that's not included in the standard. That is defined by local or tax legislation, but that's not part of the IFRS standard. No, what is IAS 24 then referring to? Well, it ensures appropriate disclosures are made for the related party transactions. All entities need to comply with IAS 24. However, and we will see that later on, there is one exception for certain disclosures with respect to government-related entities. Also, what with intra-group related party transactions that are eliminated on consolidation, so group transactions that are part of your consolidation group, well, these are, of course, not required to be disclosed in the entity's consolidated financial statements because these are eliminated. So you do not see them anymore in your consolidation. However, if you have transactions with associates or joint ventures, in which case it's possible that you only eliminate portions of transactions, then you should still disclose the portions of the transactions that have not been eliminated in applying the equity accounting.
So we add to that, Anouk. It's important to look here at the consolidation circle of the reporting entity. For example, here we have Mother Search NV. Obviously, then you look at everything which is eliminated at the consolidation circle of Mother Search NV, which means that anything that would be eliminated if we would consolidate at a higher level, family NV, is not eliminated at the level of Mother Search NV. So if you are reporting at the Mother Search NV, you should still disclose any transactions you have with family NV, because that is not eliminated at the level of Mother Search NV.
Thank you, Hans. Then I show again the group structure, but I assume that most of you already have it open in the separate file. We will now have a look at some practical examples with respect to the key management personnel and close family members. The question here is Albert Tillens in this case, and you see part of the structure already on the screen. Is he key management personnel? Is he related party? Is he key management personnel? Well, here the answer is yes, because we said Albert Tillens is in fact key management of family NV. And family NV is the parent of Mother Search, so that's sufficient to say that we have related party between Mother Search and Albert Tillens. And that's also the case for Anna Dirks for the same reason. If we now modify a bit the structure, and we see here that Anna Dirks is not key management personnel anymore of family NV. So she's not key management, but now she has control over family NV. So she owns, instead of 40%, she owns now 80% of family NV. Does that change anything? Well, if we have a look, for Albert Tillens, there is no change because he was key management personnel of family NV. That is the same situation as it was before. But also Anna Dirks remains a related party However, the reason why she is a related party changed. It's not because she is key management personnel anymore, but because she has control over family NV. Then we have a second poll, which we will launch. The question is the following personnel key management personnel in the consolidated financial statements? And the question goes about the executive directors and non-executive directors. We will launch a poll and you will have the possibility to answer one or more possibilities to are these key management personnel of the company. Thanks. The majority has voted. And we see that all of you that have voted agrees that executive directors are key management personnel, but not all of you are convinced that the non-executive directors are key management personnel. We will have a look. The answer is yes, both of them are key management personnel. So the executive directors, yeah, that's clear. They have direct responsibilities for planning, directing, and controlling the activities of family NV. However, the definition does not limit key management to only include executive directors. It is also possible that non-executive directors still are key management personnel of the company. What with a financial controller? A financial controller who works closely with the finance director, and he has been delegated responsibility for budgeting and forecasting. Is that key management personnel or not? Well, in fact, here we say it depends. It can be yes or no. It's quite judgmental because it will depend on the size and the scope of his delegated responsibilities. So the definition of key management personnel is for sure not limited to directors only. Also, other members of management team may be key management personnel, but it will depend on the size and the scope of what the responsibilities are. A third question with relation to key management personnel. In this case, we have a director of Sigma BV. Sigma BV in the group chart of Family NV is a subsidiary of Family NV. And Sigma BV is the most significant subsidiary. That's the information I give you in addition. The directors of Family NV have in fact limited direct involvement in running the operations of Sigma, because the operations of Sigma require some specialist knowledge of medical devices. And therefore, the director of Sigma BV has a lot of responsibility with regard to the operations of Sigma, and the directors of Family, which is the parent, are only limitedly involved. The question now is the director of Sigma, in that case, key management personnel of Family NV, so of the parent, in fact? The answer is yes. In the consolidated financial statements of a group, your key management personnel will not only be limited to that one of the parent entity itself. In this example, because Sigma is such a significant subsidiary and the director of Sigma has a lot of responsibility with respect to the operations, because the directors of Family are limitedly involved, we consider that the director of Sigma is therefore also a key management personnel of family NV itself, of the parent entity, in fact. Additionally, and nice to know, a person is key management of an entity, even if that entity does not pay for the services it receives. So it is possible that there is no remuneration and still that person can be a key management. Also important to know is that it's not just a person, but yeah, you have to see it rather as a role, a kind of role that key management is taking. So it should not only be linked to just a person, but it's like a role that he is taking. And then we focus a little bit more on close family members, and there's again a poll linked to this. If you have no additional information, would you expect the following persons to be close family members? And the three options are children, spouse or domestic partner, and children of the spouse or the domestic partner. So here the question is, which of those three, or more than one, do you consider to be close family members? I will start the poll. I will close the poll as most of you have answered. And what we can see is that for the children, it's for most of you quite obvious that these are close family members. For the spouse or domestic partner or the children of the spouse, there is more doubt. But we will have a look at it. In fact, the answer is all three are included in the definition of close family members. So not only your own children as a natural person that is related to an entity, but also the partner, the spouse or the partner of you, and also the children of that partner, if that would be another, if that would be not your children. So in fact, important to know is that here we should have a look at who may be expected to influence or be influenced by the person that is dealing with the entity. And these examples, these three examples are the three examples that are explicitly and specifically covered in the standard, but the standard also says it's not limited to those three alone. So in the assessment, it may become more difficult when you look at also other relationships like cousins, uncles, or aunts. But if these persons should be dependent on you or can be influenced by you, then these can also be close family members. So judgment will be required in assessing all family relationships, and the key criteria here to remember and to consider is that these are dependent from those persons that have a direct link to the reporting entity. We'll now have a look at the disclosures itself.
So looking at required disclosures, we already briefly mentioned it on the first slide. What is required to be disclosures if you have identified your related parties? First of all, the related party relationships. Regardless whether there have been any transactions, the disclosure of the name or ultimate controlling party should be mentioned there. I think the subsidiaries are mostly already included because you describe your consolidation circle. So it's important to look beyond that. And the minimum to mention is the parent or the ultimate controlling party, if that would be different. It's also important to mention whether the parent or the ultimate controlling party did or did not prepare consolidated financial statements. Second category of required disclosure is related party transactions. And if such transactions took place, you should give more details on that. First of all, there is the nature of the related party relationship, information about those transactions, and also information about any outstanding balance to understand potential effect on the annual financial statement. And also, lastly, information about impairment or doubtful debts with those related parties. A third category would be the outstanding balances with those related party. And last but not least, commitments you gave to related parties or commitments you received from related parties. So quite extensive disclosure requirements. Obviously, in reality, it's not always the case that all of them are in place. Later on, we'll go to a number of examples, but if any of those are in place, you should disclose them in your financial statements in the note regarding the related parties. Regarding key management personnel, there is a requirement to disclose in total, so not by person, but in total, following categories at the minimum. So you should mention what are the short-term employee benefits, also any post-employment benefits, other long-term benefits, as well as termination benefits if those are in place. So I think the first category is really related to the ongoing remunerations, bonuses, and so forth. Post-employment, if there's any pension plan or so forth in place, it's also important to mention those. And other long-term benefits can be, for example, share-based payments and so forth. It's important also here to see the differences, and that's what we already mentioned. In practice, there's overlap with requirements from local legislations as well as regulatory authorities. So all quoted companies, for example, are required to include a remuneration report. Technically, that's not part of your financial statements, but in practice, a lot of companies include one annual report, which includes the annual report, including the remuneration report, and then at the back, there's also the financial statements. There is overlap, but do know that disclosure requirements in that remuneration report are more detailed and more extensive. For example, if you look at the Belgian Code of Companies and the Royal Decree next to it, you will see you will need to have a further breakdown in much more detailed categories of the different remunerations allocated. And also you will be required to disclose separately the remuneration of the Chief Executive Officer. So important to consider what is to be included in my note in the financial statements. That is linked to that. And in practice, you see most will refer to the remuneration report, which is included elsewhere in your annual report. Let's look at an example now of government-related exemptions, because the list of this required disclosures I would describe applies to everybody, except if there would be a government-related exemption. Then, and I'll explain later on, you will be limited to a number of descriptions, but not the full list as I explained earlier. What is now a government-related entity? Basically, it refers to any government agency or similar bodies, being local, national, or international. And a government-related entity, as Anouk explained earlier, is an entity that is controlled by such a body or government agency, being controlled, jointly controlled, or significantly influenced by. Let's look here at an overview, and let's have a look in which of the following diagram, where the government is mentioned in blue, which parties are not government-related entities. So we have family M, we have family K, and we have Mr. Guido. Looking at that, the answer is that only Mr. Guido is not a government-related entity. It's clear that family M, totally here in the bottom, is controlled because there is control by the government on family A, and family A itself has control on family M. Looking at family K, there is a significant influence directly from the government, so also a government-related entity. Mr. Guido is key management personnel of family C. Although family C is controlled by the government, Mr. Guido itself is not a government-related entity here. If you are considered as a government-related entity, there is a partial exemption that can be used. At that moment, the following disclosure are still required next to what would have been the case otherwise. So you should mention the name of the government and nature of its relationship with the reporting entity. I'll show you a practical example later on where that is the case. And then, and that's more judgmental, you should mention in sufficient detail to enable users to understand the effect, transactions, but only significant transactions. So if you have individual significant transaction, you should mention the nature and the amount. And for all other transactions that are collectively significant, also qualitative and quantitative indication. So especially the last one is really judgmental and will require some discussion. I think if there's an individual transaction, then the key question, what is now significant or not significant? The following could be an example of what is a disclosure. There you describe which government body is controlling, in this case controlling, it would also be significant influencing a company, which is here family G, and then you describe what is the relationship. So there's a supplier agreement with some key aspects of that agreement. Also, aggregate sales value are mentioned, and also open positions. So looking at significant transaction, the term significant is not defined. So let's have a look at here. It's not a poll, but take a few moments to think for yourself. Which of the following criteria should be considered in assessing whether or not a transaction is significant? I leave 30 seconds. So I presume you all had time to think for yourself. There's no formal poll included here, but given it's yes or no, I'm quite sure that everybody had the moment to think about it. So in fact, all of those criteria are important. So the size could be relevant to identify whether or not it's significant. I think that's quite obvious. If a transaction is on or below market terms, that can also be because it might be insignificant from a size. But if it's a non-market, it might indicate that if it would be a market on market terms, it could be still sizable. If it's outside normal day-to-day business operations, so if it's the core activity of the reporting entity or not, could be a matter to consider. Is it significant or not? Is it disclosed to regulatory or supervisory authorities? When it's reported to senior management, it's not because it's reported that it's automatically significant, but given it is reported, it could be a factor to consider. Why is it reported, and shouldn't it then be considered as significant? And whether or not the transaction is next to board approval, also subject to shareholder approval. So you see the list, although not defined, of matters to consider can be quite extensive. Let's look at some examples. Those are publicly available, so we also mentioned which company it is. There's a wide variety, so we take a number of, but obviously in practice you will see different matters. I think here there's a disclosure of EcoPack, where first of all we see the key management compensation listed, where also as a description of those parties. We see the different categories as requested by IAS 24. and then it's mentioned there. Further, and still in the same company, it mentions how many members are list of the key management. I don't think it's technically required by IAS 24, but anyhow, you will include it in your remuneration report, so it's mentioned here as well. I think this is the similar as listed in the table before. And then the second one is not linked to key management compensation, but related party relationships. What are the outstanding balances and what are the relations that had took place during the year? Another example here, it's Biotalis. There we see, first of all, a list of transactions with related parties. It mentions certain shareholders, and then they're talking about convertible bonds. Further, also a finance lease and R&D services. And here we also have commitments. So this disclosure includes both relationships, transactions, outstanding positions at year end, as well as commitments that have been made towards related parties as well. Moving further, and still in Biotalis, and there they included in two different subnotes. They included key management compensation, listing also the different categories as required by IAS 24, and also some other payments in the form of share-based payments. They also explicitly state that there are no loans granted to any director or officer. So stating that those are not there are also a possibility to do here. This is an example of the usage of the government-related entity exemption. It's NG, and there, first of all, they refer to another note where they will describe the key management compensation. They also refer to another note looking at all related party transactions with joint ventures and associates. And then they clearly make use of the government-related entity exemption, mentioning that for them it's the French state, and also describing the nature of its relationship. So how much is the shareholding done, which demonstrates clearly that there is significant influence. There might be some evolutions over time, and also the fact that a number of board seats have been selected by the government. Also, some legislation which impacts them, as that clearly is an impact in their relationship too. It continues further describing different laws that are impacting the NG environment they're working in. So nature and amount are mentioned here. Also, other entities controlled or influenced by the French state are mentioned, such as EDF, and also further description is mentioned here as well. And then lastly, there's also the Caisse nationale des industries électriques et gazières, which is a government body, and as such, it's also mentioned there because the post-employment benefits are there held in that government body. Another example is Umicore, where first of all they mentioned all transactions being on an income statement point of view or dividends received with joint ventures and associates, as well as outstanding positions with those GVs and associates as well at the year end. They state explicitly which kind of transaction it is. So here it's commercial sales and purchase of goods. And they also state that there are no transactions with entities held by key management personnel, which would be, if we look at our example, those entities controlled by Mrs. Anna. Here they clearly state that no such transactions took place. Further, in Umicore financial statements, they have key management compensation, and they decided to make a split between the supervisory board on the one side and the management board on the other side. What is also interesting to see is that they make a clear statement that amounts mentioned here link to the financial statements and are as such from an accounting view, and that their remuneration report, which is mentioned elsewhere in their annual accounts, could have slightly different figures because they're not from an accounting perspective, but from perspective on how cash-wise it is paid. Here they go in further details, mentioning supervisory board and also mentioning how and why some figures mentioned here in this note can be different from the remuneration report. Concluding up our session on IAS 24 related to related parties. So IAS 24 gives you clear hands to identify your related parties, which is a quite extensive list. So don't look only at your subsidiaries or mother. As Anouk explained, the definition of related party is quite broad, so it will also require some judgment in some cases, but it can go quite far. Also look at your key management personnel, and the question what is key and non-key management is also important to make there. So as Anouk mentioned, it's looking at who has control over budgeting and reporting, and also those close family members of either related parties, if it's a natural person, or a key management personnel. And then, if applicable, know that if there's a government-related entity that is also a related party, you can apply for some exemptions. So not only control is relevant, also joint control and significant influence is sufficient to be considered as a related party. There are minimum requirements to do, and once those are in place, there's a quite extensive list on describing your relationships as well as transactions and balances and commitments. I think that was it for IAS 24. We're ahead of schedule because IAS 24 is not the most extended standard, but we hope we were able to give you a bit more insight in what is the requirement from an IFRS standard perspective. But do know, as said earlier, that in practice you will also have influence of local legislation, and in Belgium especially company law, which also requires further disclosures in the remuneration report, for example. Next sessions will be, first of all, our additional XBRL tax blogging taggings webinars, which take place on 22nd of November and 24th of November. And then, as announced earlier, 1st of December, we have an IFRS seminar on IFRS updates and the ESMA priorities for 2022 financial statements. And just before Christmas, there will be a session on IAS 33 earnings per share at the scheduled timing. Thank you for attending our session. We hope you enjoyed it and enjoy your lunch and afterwards the long weekend for most.